Buongiorno a tutti e a tutti, sono Massimo Leone, direttore del Centro per le Scienze Religiose della Fondazione Bruno Kessler. Oggi continuiamo con il nostro seminario annuale dedicato al tema della trasformazione della conservazione nella religione e nell'etica. Abbiamo un ospite d'eccezione, il professor Sundo Kim, che è un collega di fama internazionale, oltre che un amico che ci consente di esplorare delle tradizioni, delle culture religiose che non tocchiamo di frequente e rispetto alle quali, in particolar modo il buddismo, il professor Sundo Kim è uno dei pochi studiosi capaci di sviluppare una riflessione sull'impatto delle nuove tecnologie su questa religione e su questa cultura religiosa, su questa tradizione, così come al contrario la ricezione che questa cultura religiosa ha sviluppato nel tempo rispetto a tecnologie di diverso tipo. So I'll switch now to English. Professor Sundo Kim is a distinguished scholar, professor of linguistic theories, semiotics, and visual studies at the University of Korea. Is a PhD from University of Paris 10 in linguistics, general linguistics and semiotics. He is the founder and president of ASIA, which is the Asian Semiotics International Association, and has been a visiting professor from his home university, Korean University, to many other institutions in the world, including the University of Oxford, University of Harvard, University of Cambridge, SNRS, and Sorbonne Paris University. At the moment, also thanks to a connection with the Bruno Kessler Foundation, in particular, thanks to the mediation of Professor Deborah Tonelli, whom I thank very much. Professor Sundo Kim is a visiting professor at the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, so he promised to me that he's going to say something in Italian with a Roman accent. He has been a senior Fulbright Fellow. He has been LG Yonam Senior Fellow, which is one of the most distinguished fellowships in Korea. He has been a fellow of the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He has won several prizes, including the Mouton d'Or Prize, which is the prize won by the best article published in Semiotics and Semiotica, in the main international journal for this discipline. And he has also been fundamental and instrumental in introducing French theory, structuralism, post-structuralism in Korea. He has been the official translator of Jacques Derrida, of Umberto Eco, of Gilbert Julien Grémas, of Charles Sanders Peirce, of Ferdinand de Saussure. His last book he has, of course, published extensively in Korean, in French, and in English. It's a massive book, very complex, very ambitious, published in 2024, Essai de Grammatology comparée, which is a work that summarizes the latest research of Professor Sundo Kim, who is, by the way, the author of more than 20 books in Korean in the field of Saussurean studies, many of which have been translated. So I thank you very much for visiting us today. And after this brief presentation, I'll also announce the title of his talk in Italian, which is going to be Buddhismo, Tecnologia e Arti, una grammatologia del buddismo, Buddhism, Technology and the Arts, a grammatology of Buddhism. And we'll now start the presentation. So we'll share the screen. And hopefully things will work. Okay, Professor Sundo Kim, the floor is yours.
Grazie professore Massimiliano. Buongiorno a tutti, mi chiamo Sun Gugin, professore di semiotica e teorie visive e dei media. Attualmente professore invitato alla Pontifica Università Gregoriana per un soggiorno di ricerca di un semestre sabbatico. Vorrei parlare in italiano, che mi piace molto, ma il mio italiano è ancora rudimentale, dunque non posso osare di inclinare o disonorare questa preziosa lingua davanti a grandi scienziati come voi. Cambiare la lingua. So, today's title
Your Italian is very good, by the way. You impressed me.
Sì, sì. As a linguista, questa lingua è molto importante. This is a theory of contents. It's quite ambitious project. In fact, I presented a very sketch idea in the last year, exactly with the help of the Professor Massimo Leones, Collège Bernardin in Paris. And then, by chance, Professor Leones gave the chance to involve my research. It's quite ambitious. So my talk divided in 6 parts, but probably I couldn't finish all these ideas. So I stopped. When I stop, I begin where I begin.
Second part next time.
Right. Probably, yeah. It is good ideas. Lovely city. And some probably remarks. Well, I think you will be surprised. Buddhism and technology is first seems a strange pairing couple. Some might dismiss a fashionable, even frivolous approach to the study of a 2,500-year-old religion. Nevertheless, there are various ways in which an inquiry that connect religion with technology makes sense. After all, as a social beings, we all find ourselves embedded in both, indeed, inescapably. So, more to the point, the idea of technique as knowledge and skill applied a goal, telos, is deeply embedded in Indian ascetic traditions, where salvation is achieved by the passionate, contemplative or meditative skills. As you know, the sociologist Max Weber had already realized this aspect when he said of Indian religions that they, I quote, are in theory and in practice the most world-denying forms of religion ethics which the earth has begun. In the same way, their respective technology is the most developed. It's the word of Max Weber, 1920. Though, as you know, just I would like to show a sketch of my recent work, how the technology is appreciated. It's very important. I published the acte semiotique Paris in French. Paris is a kind of the Buddhist culinary ritual. So when I prepared this work, I visited, I observed, and it's so sophisticated. Unfortunately, even the young monks now don't practice this kind of very complex rituality. But aesthetically, narratively, and ethically, in every aspect of it is a very high technology. It's a very important point. Though the another issue. Of course, when you talk about the technology and Buddhism, you might consult obligatory this magistral work, Joseph Needham, Science and Civilization in China, initiated by the great scholar Joseph Needham. It must remain the first part of core for anyone interested in the science and technology of China and East Asia before modern times. There is no question, but when he set out on this project over almost 8 or 7 decades ago, his attitude towards Buddhist influence on the course of technological development in China and in East Asia was undoubtedly quite negative. I am motivated by a desire to embrace Eastern aesthetics and Buddhist philosophy as a means of redeeming Western technoculture. The assumption that many Buddhist thinkers share is that at the core of Western culture, since at least the Enlightenment, there lies an originary and all-encompassing philosophical error, manifested most immediately in the perils of modern technology. And that is Asian aesthetics and Buddhism could offer a way out of this awful matrix. I hope to demonstrate that this desire could inform Western and even Eastern Western debates about technology and art since the late 19th century. Although the machines has for over 100 years functioned as an almost religious object of enthusiasm and veneration, Western and literature have been shaped as much by distance to technology as by submission to it. Buddhism as technology is a very important concept. Could it be a compelling fantasy that would posit Eastern Buddhist aesthetics as both the antidote to and the perfection of machine culture? I suggest to look to East for more organic, less approximative ways of living with machines. The key term is Buddhism, techne, of course, a word which to the ancient Greeks meant both art and technology. To argue for the value of the Buddhism's techne is not an ethnographic effort to account for difference, but a kind of moral aspiration, identifying within the other tradition of technological experience fundamentally untainted by mechanical inframings of modern Europeans. This enchantment of nature. Unlike the more typical protocols of Orientalist discourse, in which the East is either catalyzed as a stagnantly tactless or else dangerously imitating Western technoculture. The advocates of Buddhism as techne asserts that the technologically superior West had to aggressively maybe impose the dictates of industrial life. And that it was necessary to turn to the culture and tradition of the East in order to recover the essence of some misplaced or as a not unfulfilled modern identity, according to the Habermas. As a summary, let me provide a quotation from Heidegger. His idea reflects a general therapeutic effort to explore alternatives to the over-technologization, what he called Gestalt, or inflaming in English our Western modernity, specifically in the question concerning technology. Heidegger returns to the etymological root of technology in as effort to rescue forms of thinking and handicraft from the systematic or metaphysics of modern techno and originally technique. There was a time when it was not technology alone that bore the name technique. Once the living that brings forth truth into the splendor of radiant appearance was also called technique. Once there was time when the bringing forth of the true into the beautiful was called technique. And the poesis of the fine arts was also called technique. Some words about the word grammatology. I have no time to discuss the epistemological or methodological assumptions, grammatology, but simply I would like to say that I use the grammatology as a method for the media archaeology of East Asian traditions. So I think it was almost impossible to define what is grammatology. It could be a kind of a theory of writing or language or culture, whatever. For me, grammatology is very fascinating because you could, the black box of grammatology, whatever you want. So I applied this concept of grammatology in the essay of grammatology to trace the archaeology of the intermediate in East Asian tradition. That was published last year. So I am inspired by some thinkers. The first thinker, very important, is Henri Lebrun. For me, definitely a resource. And another American media theorist, J.D. Porter, I invite him, I discussed it in Seoul, relatively unknown in the French side. And of course, as a theoretician of media studies, I'm influenced by Rousseau and Petrus, so and so on. Now, let's move on to the section 2. How did the spread Buddhism influence the Asian societies? East Asian Buddhism refers to the form of Buddhism practiced in China, Japan, Korea, and Vietnam. Unfortunately, I could say any word about Vietnam because I never visited Vietnam. By the way, I visited almost over 30 times. Kyoto is almost every semester I visited Kyoto, as you know very well. All these traditions share a common basis of the Chinese Buddhist canon, which is grounded in the Mahayana school of thought. Within this context, the Korean and Japanese forms and schools come directly from Chinese forms and schools, although they subsequently developed distinct local traditions. Buddhism first entered China via the Silk Route through Central Asia, sometime during the Han Dynasty, 200 before Christ and 200 after Christ, and also via Sea Route from India and Sri Lanka. From China, Buddhism entered the Korean Peninsula in the 4th century, and then Japan in the 6th century. Contemporary scholar Robert Buswell asserts that in the pre-modern world, there was really interchange of Buddhist ideas between China, Korea, and Japan, and other traditions as well. He suggests that this reflects the existence of East Asian Buddhism. That is something more than the sum of its constituent parts. Buswell also suggests the Buddhist monk of East Asia saw themselves not so much as Korean monk or Chinese monk or Japanese monk, but instead as joint collaborators in a religious tradition that transcend contemporary notion of nation and time. When Buddhism began entering China, the Mahayana was still in its early stage development. Contemporary other Buddhists scholar Eric Georger suggests that Buddhist monasteries were already established in Central Asia at the time when Buddhism was introduced to China. He says, I quote, by the beginnings of 2nd century CE, Buddhist monasteries could be found all over the Christian Empire, in Afghanistan and Kashmir, in the most prosperous parts of present-day Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, so on. How did the spread of Buddhism influence East Asian societies? The spread of Buddhism significantly influenced East Asian societies by shaping their cultural, social, and political landscapes. Culturally, Buddhism introduced new forms of art, literature, and philosophy. Buddhist scriptures translate into local languages, enrich the literary traditions of countries like China, Korea, and Japan. The teachings of Buddhism also inspired new philosophical ideas and debates among scholars. In the realm of art, Buddhist iconography became a dominant theme in sculpture and painting, leading to the creation of many iconic works of art. For example, the national treasure number 78. So all Koreans love this sculpture. Is one of my favorite. And number one, treasure Japanese treasure number one is also the Bodhisattva scene in wood. Secondly, Buddhism played a significant role in shaping societal norms and values. The Buddhist principles of compassion, nonviolence, and the pursuit of enlightenment resonated with many people, influencing their attitudes and behaviors. Buddhism also promoted social equality, as it taught that anyone, regardless of their social status, could achieve enlightenment. This led a profound impact on societies that were deeply stratified, offering hope and a sense of dignity to the lower classes. Politically, Buddhism had a significant influence on the governance of many Eastern Asian states. Many rulers embraced Buddhism as a state religion, using its teachings to legitimize their rule and promote social harmony. For instance, during the Sui and the Tang dynasty in China, emperors often portrayed themselves as Buddhist monarchs, supporting the construction of temples and the propagation of Buddhist teachings. Furthermore, Buddhism facilitated cultural exchange and interaction among East Asian societies. The spread of Buddhism often involved the transmission of other cultural and technological innovations from India and Central Asia. They led to the introduction of new agricultural techniques, medical knowledge, so on. So let me evoke the Gandhara art. 2 weeks ago in Pontifical University, a professor from Roma University delivered Buddhism, but it was missing the Korean Gandhara art. At the end of the Korean Peninsula, you can observe this exactly the Gandhara art. So this is not Korean people, so, but you know, for the purification of they never teach this. Yeah, very strange. Yeah. Now, in conclusion, the spread of Buddhism had a profound and lasting impact on East Asian societies, civilizations. Its influence can still be seen today in the cultural heritage, social norms, and political institutions of many East Asian countries. By ensuring that the Buddha's teachings were transmitted across millennia, the religion helped and spread painting techniques around the world. This is my central topic. But this is quite general narrative. As a linguist and semiotician, I would like to just evoke the cognitive and affective, even metaphysical impact of Buddhism on the minds of East Asian people through common Buddhist words used in everyday life. There's no such studies, but it's very important for me. Therefore, my hypothesis is that using these words, they might be Buddhist, even unconsciously. So for me, every Korean speaker must be Buddhist unconsciously, because they use those words. For example, inyon, even schoolboy, 5 years understand inyon, but impossible to translate. English, match, connection, time, marriage, relationship. In Italian, destino, fatto, affinità, connessione, origine, impossible. The terms of vocabulary, for example, instant, challa, choshin, that means the vocabulary, very common vocabulary from the Zen Buddhism. When you lose your original mind, your original preparation, choshin, return to your choshin, then your beginning minds. In terms of vocabulary, upwards of 30,000 Indic words entered the Semitic lexicon with Buddhism, beginning in the 4th century AD, many of which are still spoken in the common language of today, including those of convenience, instant, and meditation. In fact, this word inyan, one of the most used for all situations, all social classes, represent the Buddhist cosmology, life with suffering, experienced within the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. In the Tibetan Dharma thinking, we are in the big field, the Yama. The Lord of Hell is holding, as you know, as you see. His facial hair is on fire, and he wears a crown of skulls. All this, at the center of the field, there are 3 animals symbolizing the root cause of suffering, the 3 poisons: ignorance, pig, attachment, rooster, and anger, snake. The latter 2 come out of the mouth of pig. Ignorance is a primary obstacle to achieving anything. Take note. There are some slightly accurate difference. For example, in this iconography is a delusion or another interpretation. Is the secondary one. As you know, a disciple of Buddhist asked the master, between lying and ignorance, what is the worst? The reply of the Buddha was clear. Of course, the worst is ignorance. Scholars have researched the impact of Buddhism on pre-modern and modern East Asian from different aspects, both within and between politics, art, ideology, cultural practice, and food. Among existing academic literature on Buddhism's impact on interaction between nations within East Asia, the expansion of certain material cultural elements and cultural concepts and food ways among the major codes. Buddhism in East Asia began within the advent in China in the 1st century. Argued that the Buddhism, some scholars argue that the Buddhist art of breast statues spread into China together with the breast-making metallurgy from the Gandhara region, as I told you. In this sense, Buddhism and the Gandhara region facilitated the spread of certain technologies into East Asia along with religion. After China, the Korean Peninsula became the 2nd region to adopt the religion in East Asia, and eventually the stepping stone of Buddhist expansion in East Asia. But Buddhism never completely eradicated the local religion. Instead, It incorporated local gurus into its system and gave them legitimacy as protocols and devotees of the Buddha. So when you visit the Korean temple, you observe the many shamanistic and local deities. Buddhism also offers a more complex understanding of the universe at large, both ethical and physical, with its many moral injunctions. Buddhism served as a foundation of Korean ethics, best exemplified by the precepts that were given to military use, but yet grounded in Buddhist teachings of nonviolence and the life's preciousness. Now another story, very important. On the earthly plane, Buddhism provided a concrete awareness of India as a real place to which one could conceivably journey to. At least one Sri monk, almost 6th century, did so and wrote a travelogue about it. It's an amazing story. So he visited, first of all, China, and then he made a journey, all trace of Buddha's teachings by foot. Many of the travelers who regularly went back and forth between Korea and China were monks, fueled by a desire to more closely study Buddhism on the continent. But most importantly, Buddhism became a kind of universal language spoken by people all countries in East Asia. By influencing the shapes, politics, ethics, metaphysics, geography, and the life here and even thereafter, Buddhism presented East Asians with a common way of thinking against the backdrop of which exchange of ideas and goods could unfold and thrive. This manuscript was discovered by Paul Berry, as you know, in the Tunang Cave. It's one of the great discoveries in the 20th century archaeology. And it's kept in the Bibliothèque Nationale de Paris. Buddhist monasteries, especially managed by state gift of land and slaves, asserted their reputations at the center of culture and learning. Grand temples and pedagogues mushroomed everywhere, and paintings and statues of the Buddhist pantheon appeared in place high and low as tangible manifestations. The art of printing was another important legacy of Buddhism in Korea. Buddhists found it obligatory upon them to propagate the Buddha's teachings because it led to accumulation of poetic merit known as karma. One way to spread Buddhism was through production of images of Buddha, but the duplication of the sacred texts were considered equally important as an expression of faith. Hand copying, as you know, is practiced nowadays, like a Bible, was difficult proportion in early medieval Korea. Literacy was low and qualified scribes too few. Scriptures were written in complex Chinese characters and difficult to read, and the amount of time and energy required to individually copy text was too great compared to the volume of output. It was inevitable that the printing technology would evolve to meet the voracious appetite of Buddhists for more set words. Now, as an interlude, let me put the question: why Dharma went to the West? No, East. It's a title of the very important film. This question is not idle because this question is raised by Lord Levi-Strauss. I published a short book about the transcultural. So let me quote. Que l'Occident remonte aux sources de son déchirement en s'interposant entre le bouddhisme et le christianisme. L'islam nous a islamisés quand l'Occident s'est laissé entraîner par les croisades, à s'opposer à lui et donc à lui ressembler plutôt que se prêter. Cela n'avait pas existé à cette lente osmose avec le bouddhisme qui nous eut christianisés, donc une sorte de virtual history, davantage et dans un sens d'autant plus chrétien que nous serions remontés en deçà du christianisme même. C'est alors que l'Occident a perdu sa chance de rester femme. I don't agree with all comments, especially against Islam. But in the last interview, Lady Sos did not concession. I was not. I don't want to correct myself. But the problem is that his eloge of Buddhism, rester femme, is very symbolic, metaphoric. So it's a scenario. If there was a meeting between East and Buddhism, the Western civilization have been more pacific. It's my interpretation. More harmony. Ni l'un, l'autre ne sont des dieux. Voilà leur unique point commun. À nous autres égards, ils s'opposent. L'un chaste, l'autre puissant avec ses 4 épouses. L'un androgyne, l'autre barbu. L'un pacifique, l'autre belliqueux. L'un exemplaire, l'autre messianique. Le moi n'est pas seulement haïssable, il n'a pas de place en nous et en rien. Que j'ai appris d'autres, en effet des maîtres que j'ai écoutés, des philosophes que j'ai lus, des sociétés que j'ai visitées et de cette science, même dont l'Occident tire son orgueil, sinon des bribes de leçons qui, mises bout à bout, reconstituent la méditation du sage au pied de l'arbre. So for him, pas plus que l'individu n'est seul dans le groupe et que chaque société n'est seule parmi les autres, l'homme n'est seul dans l'univers. I think we understand the essence of Buddhism. Everything is connected, everything. Not only between human beings, but every sentient animals, every connection. This philosophy, I think, reflected the philosophy internet. Yeah, it has many papers like that. Yeah. And this morning, I found another quotation, a very famous American philosopher. Somewhere on the way, in passing from the scientific facts and distinctions to the traditional philosophical foundations of modern Western culture, a mistake was made. We must find this mistake. Just one remark about Buddhism or Buddhist art. On the contrary to the iconoclasm in Christian civilization and Islamic civilization, in Buddhism there was never iconoclasm. So there was never iconoclast. The word was invented by the reproductive. I think you know very well this barbarous act. The Taliban destroyed the statue, the great statue of Buddha. Now, the section 3. The way of the word means the translation into the Chinese words. Depending on the region of the world and historic period, Buddhist manuscripts and the books have been created on a wide range of materials, including stone, palm leaves, precious metals, ivory, cloth, paper, and silk. The Buddha's paintings are written in Sanskrit, Pali, Chinese, Tibetan, Japanese, South Asian languages.
And palm leaves as well, which are very important.
Palm
leaves.
Which
are the least studied manuscripts so far.
Right.
In Hamburg, there is a center that studies only palm leaves.
Only palm leaves, I see. Thank you for comments. These gold sheets are from the Pure Kingdoms and date to the 5th century AD. They were excavated in Burma in 1897. All are distinguished by the salt fleece, delicacy, and beauty with which they celebrate the life and ideas of Buddha, as well as by the ingenuity of the media of transmission. As an early example of Buddhist text engraved in pure script on gold sheets demonstrates how exquisite and solid the Buddhist textual letters can be. Palm leaf, for example, manuscript were prevalent form of a textual transmission from the time of the Buddha until the development of the printing press. Let me show the fragments of Gandhara scrolls from the 4th century AD, created about 400 years after the historical Buddha is thought to have lived. These are outstanding importance. Why? Because they are the oldest existent written scriptures of Buddhism. The scrolls were made of birch bark in Gandhara, an ancient Buddha kingdom. In this region present day, Afghanistan and Pakistan, they contain Buddhist scriptures in the Gandhara language and Karachi script. The fragments seem so ancient and fragile, yet the script on them remains very clear. This 10th century scroll illustrates the Sutra of the 10 Kings, describing 10 stages during the transitory phase following death. It's from the British Library. We make a jump in refinement of manuscript transmission to a version of paper as we know it, with the Sutra of 10 Kings, which was found in a cave near Dunhuang, northwest China. By that time, paper had been in use in Central and East Asia, where the drier climate lent itself thinner materials. As you know, I have no time for description. The judged souls were wooden kangaroos and are driven by a golem. The 6 possibility of rebirths depicted, from hell to Buddhahood. The Lotus Sutra is seen by many as a summary of the Buddha's teaching. This 17th century scroll from Japan is written in Chinese characters. Japan is an important center for Buddhism and for refined manuscript creation. So there are 2 extraordinary. A copy of the Lotus Sutra was commissioned by Emperor Go-Mizunoo in 1636. The Lotus Sutra is a key text in the Mahayana tradition of East Asia. It is seen by the many of its adherents as the summation of the Buddha's teachings. On display is the scroll of the chapter 8. And another is 10 million pagoda charms, we Korean the Paik Nam Jun, among the earliest example of painting in the world. Is controversial between Korean and cross.
It's a competition.
Competition. Let me draw our attention to the million pagoda charms, containing incantation to invoke the protective deities, because they are the earliest example of printing in Japan, and among the earliest maybe in the world, dating back to the between 764-770, almost simultaneously in Korea. Emperor Shotoku ordered the charms. It's a very recent news, another Lotus Sutra is returned from Japan. Yeah, and there's a negotiation, and this I'm very proud of it. The golden sheet is very accurate, very refined, and it's Korean million charms, the same schema, and another story about the Buddhist temples rivalry. So, two factors that made possible the impact of Semitic texts on East Asian societies. Number one, durability. Number two, portability of the material forms. That those texts took the trading and transportation links that carried books and other goods from China. The question concerns primarily the technologies that dominated the production of material texts in East Asia and the transmission of those technologies from China to neighboring societies. I refer to the very important monumental work of the British scholar Korean, the book in Japan. I think he was prized by the emperor, Japanese emperor, as an excellent scholar. First of all, crystallography. Crystallography remained the dominant printing up to the end of the 19th century, even though typography was invented in China in the 11th century and used in East Asia from the 12th century. This is because crystallography offers several advantages over typography. It's a fundamental difference in relation to the Western civilization, especially in the case of Japanese dramatic, because Japanese people learned this typography from the Portuguese missionaries and the Korean craftsmen, but Japanese people have been never interested in the typography. So at the end of 9th century, they preferred the crystallography because crystallography is flexibility. It's impossible to revive the personality, aesthetic personality through typography. It's a fundamental difference. Since furthermore,
typography implies a certain homogenization.
Homogenization, mechanization. Yeah. It's impossible to reflect the aesthetic.
It's not art.
Yeah.
It's not art.
Yeah. Especially in the case of Japanese. Yeah. Since furthermore, this copy was placed inside the pagoda, printing was clearly being used for literal purposes rather than to produce copies read. This is a very important fact. Copy. Even the illiterate man copy without understanding, because it's a literal act. Whatever the content is not important. So East Asian people inscribed in all forms, all materials. Okay. So as you see, the crystallography was essentially, and it's another technique that these lapidary texts were used to produce rubbings, the rubbings on paper, a form of textual reproduction which guaranteed uniformity and made the dissemination possible. As I know, this ritual act, that you copy the sutra and you put in the inside the pagoda to get the salvation.
This pagoda has a specific name, isn't it?
Yeah, million charms. Yeah. Same format and in Korean. Yeah. As you see, this is crystallography. But I skipped the origin of this technique of crystallography. But by the way, I would like to introduce the very important scholar, another scholar, the genius scholar who died too early, is Cartier. It is a father of the historian of the printing in China, in East Asia. It is translated into French. It's a very impressive one because he touched the mark. Why East Asians people did not make a revolution. They invented the typography almost 1 century before the Gutenberg. But there was no scientific revolution, no knowledge revolution. Let me read. In French, in English, yeah. It is to the glory of the newly awake European genius that it has been able to grasp the significance of these discoveries, dimly perceived in the Far East, if not, in some cases, scarcely understood in their native land, and to have made them the foundation of civilization, which their inventors would never have imagined. I think it's very important now. So even you invent something new, if you not understand, perceive its significance, you lose the impact, the potentiality. It's very, very important. I repeat this quotation to my students.
But it happens very often.
Yeah.
You invent something, it's someone else.
Right, yeah, that's true. It's a story of the Steve Jobs too. Yeah, he sees the impact. He bought the engineer. Now the translations. This is also very fascinating stories. For our purpose, it is important to note that this diffusion of Buddhist texts was not coupled with the preference, let alone prescription of any sacred language. On the contrary, possibly as a reaction to the exclusive use of Sanskrit in the beginning, in the Brahmanical tradition. In a much debated Vinaya passage, the Buddha is said to have explicitly permitted to preach the law in one's own tongues. Sakaya, Nirutya, variously rendered in Chinese by Gui, the common speech, the common language. In its original context, and obviously refer to closely interrelated regional languages or dialects, and eventually also to Sanskrit. However, it is an important fact that the translation of text as a corollary to the propagation of Buddhism was fully accepted and practiced long before Buddhism spread beyond the Indian subcontinent. The linguistic breakout. I think it's in the history of the translation of all civilizations. For me, one of the most important translation work is translation from Sanskrit to Chinese language. The translation of the Buddhist text into the Chinese language represented a linguistic breakthrough for the transmission of Buddhism. It was the first time that Buddhist texts were translated into a non-Prakrit language. Let me quote Eric Drucker explains. I quote, thus, the production of the earliest Buddhist text in Chinese around the middle of the 2nd century marks a linguistic breakthrough in the spread of the Dharma. For the first time, scriptures had to be translated into a language totally unrelated to any Indian text, instead of being transposed from one Prakrit to another, or from Prakrit to Sanskrit, a process that allowed for almost word-by-word transposition without any appreciable loss as regards content and way of expression. In the early transmission of Buddhists to China, Buddhist texts and traditions were transmitted from multiple points of origin, from within the Indian subcontinent and Central Asia. Within a short period of time, as a result, the Buddhism that developed in China became a melting pot of a variety of distinct traditions that had developed within the existing Buddhist world at the time. This melting pot China was from almost 15 different regions. Before jumping to the translation stories, let me insist on this very important point. This is my hypothesis in relation to the Western civilization. The Eastern civilization I would call the grammatical civilization. Let me quote, for example, Jikji, one of the most distinguished sinologists. Cet enrichissement ininterrompu de la langue écrite, qui fit de l'écriture comme le dépositaire de tout l'héritage intellectuel de la Chine, a eu pour effet de réduire la langue parlée au rôle le plus humble, celui de l'expression des banalités quotidiennes. For me, it's a very fundamental difference. When I was studying in Paris, the Parisians, the French people, like the Western peoples, I was shocked. They really enjoy their native speaking languages. I felt the anthropological difference, how enjoy with their mother tongues. In Eastern civilization, speak too much is not very common. It's not very common. Yeah. So instead, in Eastern civilization, they insist on the writing. The writing of, I gave 3 lectures in the St. Louis Sorbonne. This is, I will call sinosphere as a graphosphere too. Not simply a child writing. Graphosphere, your passport, your diagrams, your money, paper, etc., etc. And there's another story with semiotic and vernacularizations. In fact, in summary, I could say there was a perfect link blended between Buddhism and printing technology. I hope you understand this point. Now, the process by which various Buddhist texts, commentaries, and other texts were translated, often retranslated. Chinese covered many centuries. It involved the active collaboration and then another point is from orality to literacy. The migration of Buddhist teachings from India to other language communities across the globe has been a process not only as a transmission of ideas, but also one of the translation of those ideas into accessible languages and scripts. It was only after several centuries of oral transmission that Buddhist teachings began to be transformed into scripture by being inscribed in various languages and scripts. The scriptures privilege the written form, but the oral origins of many Buddhist texts are reinforced by the opening words. Thus, I heard. The oral realization of scripture is a feature of Buddhism no less than other religions. That is vigorously maintained in the 21st century, as you see. So translating Buddhism into Sinti, the first Buddhist text to reach China traveled overland from Central Asia along the Silk Road. In later centuries, however, it was largely the scriptures belonging to the Mahayana, a great branch of Buddhism. I must skip the founder, the first translator, Xuanzang, and other translators. And anyhow, let me underline that very important point. The Chinese Buddhist canon became the standard for most of the East Asian world rather than being retranslated into the vernaculars. It's a big difference. For example, the Latin Bible was translated in German and the French in Italian, etc. And in this respect, it has much in common with the Latin Vulgate version of the Bible, based on the translations produced by Saint Jerome of the Bible. Saint Jerome translation became the standard Bible of Christianity in the West, and was officially endorsed at the Council of Trent, while the Vulgate has long been superseded by vernacular translations based upon the earlier text, Hebrew, etc. But Chinese Buddhist canon remains the standard text in East Asia, while the scriptures remain untranslated in Japan, Korea, and Vietnam, while in other societies they were rapidly translated into the local written vernaculars. The big catch. That said, printing and publishing were activities confined to Buddhist monasteries. But to reply to this question, I have no answer, because in the history of East Asian civilization, they never imagined to learn Chinese folk language because it's difficult. But Paik Nam means that communication by writing is possible. So imagine that, for example, 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago, one Korean monk, one Japanese monk could communicate perfectly in written forms. So they never.
But not orally.
Huh? Not orally. Yeah, there's a big difference. This is power of the Chinese writing. We call it Paik Nam, communication by brush. This is the case. I have 5 minutes?
Yeah, even 10.
10 minutes, okay, yeah.
10 to 15.
All right, then I stop. Now, section 4, Korean Tripitaka and the Jikji. I call the Grammatology of Korean Buddhist technology. The Tripitaka, the first grammatological exemplarity in Korea. The Tripitaka Koreana, 고려 대장경. In fact, before coming here, I found the dictionary of Buddhism. They provide a section about the Tripitaka Koreana, but they don't find the author first coming. 고려 대장경. There's a big difference. So that means that they couldn't find a specialist who could explain in English. So Tripitaka is a canon. Three, Pitaka is Korbe. It says Bani. So all teachings, all speeches from Buddha. But in terms of the volumes, it's incomparably big data in modern times. It's incomparable to the Bible. The Bible, okay, is quite good, but in relation to the volume of the Buddhist canon, it's incomparable. It's almost nothing. But this Tripitaka is a collection of sacred Buddhist texts engraved by order of Korea's Goryeo dynasty, 918 and 1392 in the 20th century. It is preserved in the Heisa, Janggyeonga, printed between 1011 1082. It is the oldest and most complete intact version of the Buddhist canon. But this first version was completely destroyed by the Mongol invasion. And the Korean people tried to make a second version. This is crazy. Crazy, yeah. Of course, it's designated by the UNESCO. The reprint took place in 1237, using almost 20 years, using 81,258 wooden blocks carved on both sides. This is a library, Heinza. Intact at Heinza, the wooden blocks were made from 10 different species. There are many species studies. Vernacularization came to Korean Buddhism in stages. The first was that of the vernacular reading technique, which is known to have been practiced in Shilla in the 8th century. During the period of the dominance of the Palm School in Korea, lectures on its principal text in Flower Almond Sutra took place regularly from 7th century. The third stage followed the introduction of the Hangul script, but it is another story. So the European idea that metal letterpress printed would be revolutionary, downgrading crystallography, and its users accused of conservatism and revolutionizing the exchange and the dissemination of knowledge since Gutenberg. This idea did not exist in Korea, in East Asia. In Europe, mass printing contributed to the modernization of society after the industrial, and only in the early 9th century, it was only in 1883 that a mechanical printing press was introduced in Korea and Japan. It's the same. The world's largest volume. Wooden library lies in the open air. It's almost miraculous. In a pavilion, open to the dry, cool winds of Gaya Mountain, which protected the monasteries. Tripitaka, Korean, a collection of sacred Buddhist texts engraved on wooden tablets date from the Goryeo period. They engraved, and really this is an amazing story. If we accumulate vertically, the highest of the total volume is almost the highest of Everest mountains, vertically. How many letters? They engraved the 52 million ideograms of the precious text on 81,258 wooden plates, making up the most complex, oldest, and most complete collection of the Buddhist canon in Chinese letters. Once the engraving was complete, a coat of lacquer was applied beside to protect them from the insect, water, chemicals. The corners were decorated with copper trimmings, consisting of 100% pure copper. Let me show you some images. So the Latin is Heinza is located in the south part. Very beautiful. So what is amazing in this story? This is the crystallography. It's not typography. It's not mechanical. So during almost 18 years, the state hired, I calculated, every day at least 400 employees. they engrave, of course there's a very division of the works, but the same style, the same figures. How is possible? How is possible? This is miracle.
What a discipline.
Discipline, discipline.
Incredible.
Because the first stage is one calligrapher write on the paper, and they imitated, practice. According to recent studies in the Goryeo dynasty, the budget of the investment was almost or half of the total budget for a year. So now I think in the school manuals, why the Korean people invest in this kind of the teachers explain that all the Korean people believe in the power of Buddha. So in the invasion of the Mongol peoples, the single way to conquer is to pray, to provide this canon text. But I don't agree with that. I don't agree with
that. So you don't agree with the hypothesis that this was a form of prayer?
For me, it's symbolic.
Yeah,
I'm saying as a semiotician, Korean people believe the eternity of a cultural state. This is a proclamation before the Mongol invasions. You are barbarian, we are cultural people. This is my interpretation, very symbolic. Yeah.
Preservation of writing.
Right. Yes. And the time is up, and the other, of course, there's many enigmatic stories because the where was the first work was done? It's not the same Babylon.
So it was transported there.
Transported, yeah. There are many hypotheses, probably in the temple near to the soul. So another question is how to transport these volumes by boat or by land or by train. No, okay. And every year there is a festival to
Amazon.
Right. Like that, yeah.
Oh, this is the festival.
Right, the festival, yeah.
Fascinating.
And is a digitization works. He is the very famous American scholar of Buddhism, yeah. So to translate the canon put into the digital world, the virtual world. Yeah. The another national treasure is the Jikji. Jikji is also world record because Korea occupies an eminent place in the history of printing because of the joint development of scriptography and typography, metal technique from the 7th century, from the 13th century. To this day, the oldest known prints using these techniques were produced in Korea, providing an original counterpoint to the European experience. The oldest known were printed in metal part is a Buddhist treatise by the monk Jonghan in 13th century. This work is currently held by the Bibliothèque Nationale de Paris. Last year, there was a special exhibition implement. I was there, but just they showed the one copy, mainly for the history of the European printing story. But
and this was a technique that was developed in Korea or China, or we don't know?
It's a big question.
Big question.
Big question. But until now, this is the oldest one. But Chinese scholars, until now, they are looking for everywhere. Because
they want to have the first one.
Right, they have a source. They invented first, but there's no evidence. So Chinese people couldn't arrive and recognize because we are the inventors. How you Korean people invent this one? Maybe we can imagine that Chinese people find the original one, and this record will be broken. So the Jikji is located is founded by a French diplomat, Plancy, and Cheongju temple. This kind of work is Cheongju museums. now I think I must stop because I prepared the another side in modern times with Paik Nam Jun, because Paik Nam Jun is for me is very important. It's not only a pioneer of video art. He anticipated transhumanism, posthumanism. Especially, he is an example of the convergence of Buddhism and technology and arts. And he is transnational. He was born in Korea. He studied in Japan. He produced works in Germany, in USA. He's a really a cosmopolitan mind. But I think his works was produced when I was born, Robert, and he anticipated really all kinds of cyber, very important. But he's not a follower of Buddhism, but I think he is inspired by the Zen, and like that. Yeah. Then many works about the Tibetan Buddhas. Yes. And the final stage for next time, maybe.
Next time, or during the questions.
Yeah, it's a big issue now that I began to start that one. But I feel that Buddhism could provide many insights for the AI in terms of ethics, ontology, and anthropological. I'm sure. Yeah.
Thank you very much.